Willie Nelson's story doesn't begin with fame, fortune, or even music. It begins with heartbreak. In the tiny farming town of Abbott, Texas, in 1933, a baby boy came into the world during the harshest years of the Great Depression. That boy was Willie Hugh Nelson. But before he could even speak his first words, life dealt him a cruel hand. His father walked out on the family. His mother left soon after. Two people who should have been his safe haven were gone, abandoned. It was his grandparents who stepped in to raise him. They were poor, scraping by like so many Texans of that era, but they filled his world with something money couldn't buy: music. His grandmother, a devout Methodist, taught him hymns and insisted that he sing in church. His grandfather scraped together enough to buy him a small guitar. For a little boy who had already lost so much, that guitar became more than just an instrument. It was a lifeline. Every note he strummed was a way to fill the silence left by absent parents. But even that fragile sense of security was short-lived. When Willie was just 6 years old, tragedy struck again. His grandfather, the man who had placed that first guitar into his tiny hands, passed away. The loss was crushing. Imagine being 6 years old, already abandoned by your parents, and then losing the one person who made you feel seen. Willie carried that grief with him everywhere. Nights were long. Loneliness crept in like a shadow. To fight it, he clung to music. He would sit with his guitar, sometimes until his fingers bled, pouring every ounce of pain into sound. It's hard to overstate how much those early wounds shaped him. That sense of being left behind, of needing to find a place where he belonged. Never fully left Willie Nelson. The abandonment scarred him, yes, but it also gave him a gift: the ability to sing about heartache in a way that didn't just sound real, it was real. Those church hymns and sad ballads became the foundation of the songwriter he would become. And even as a child, people noticed there was something different in the way he played. Something raw, something true. In Abbott, Texas, little Willie was already carrying the weight of the world, but the story was just beginning. That lonely boy with the guitar in his hands was on a path that would eventually change country music forever. By the time most kids were learning how to ride a bike, Willie Nelson was already learning how to survive. In the cotton fields of Texas, under a burning sun, he picked alongside grown men. His small hands blistered, his back ached, but he pushed on. Work wasn't an option, it was survival. And that was just the beginning. As he grew older, Willie took on any job he could find: dishwasher, gas station attendant, encyclopedia salesman, even a tree trimmer. The money was barely enough to scrape by, but it kept him moving forward. Yet no matter how hard the work, Willie always carried something with him: music. After long shifts, he would pick up his guitar and head to honky-tonks, church gatherings, and roadside bars, anywhere that would let him play. Imagine the scene: a smoky little Texas bar filled with tired farmers and workers, and in the corner, a skinny kid with a beat-up guitar. He wasn't polished, he wasn't smooth, but when he played, people stopped talking. They heard something in his voice that was bigger than the boy himself. Before we dive deeper into Willie's remarkable journey, take a second to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell, because here we bring you the untold stories of legends whose lives were built on struggle, resilience, and triumph. And if you love stories like this, give the video a quick like. It helps more people discover the life and legacy of icons like Willie Nelson. Now, let's continue with his story. Music became his escape from loneliness. Every lyric he sang was like a confession. Every note was therapy. When the world told him he wasn't enough, music told him he was still here, still alive. But make no mistake, these weren't easy years. Nights of playing music often ended with mornings of heavy drinking. The rejection he felt at home as a child followed him into the clubs, where audiences sometimes dismissed him and bar owners paid him next to nothing. Still, Willie never quit. He hustled relentlessly, combining odd jobs with late-night gigs. He took DJ work at small radio stations, where he spun records by day and wrote songs by night. And slowly, without anyone noticing, something was happening. He was sharpening his craft. Every failed job, every rejected performance, every night alone with his guitar, it was all shaping the songwriter inside him. A songwriter who could capture both the beauty and the pain of the human experience. Willie Nelson was surviving, yes, but more importantly, he was becoming. The little boy abandoned by his parents was carving out an identity of his own. One song, one job, and one sleepless night at a time. And soon, the world would hear it. By his 20s, Willie Nelson had one dream that burned brighter than anything else: to make it in Nashville. Nashville was the heart of country music, the place where legends were made. But when Willie arrived, it wasn't a dream. It was a nightmare. Song after song, door after door, the answer was the same: no. Producers said his voice was too raw. His style didn't fit. His songs were too strange. In a town filled with polished, radio-friendly singers, Willie was an outsider. And rejection has a way of breaking a man down. He was broke, living hand to mouth, sometimes sleeping in cars or cheap apartments. The money from odd jobs barely kept him afloat. Nights that should have been filled with promise ended in smoky bars, where he drank more than he played. The drinking got heavier. The disappointments piled up, and the pain from his childhood, that sense of abandonment and loss, came roaring back. Then came the lowest point, one cold night. After too many rejections and too much whiskey, Willie stumbled into the street. He lay down on the pavement and waited for a car to take him out of his misery. But no car came. Instead, he got back up, shaken, numb, but alive. That moment could have ended the story of Willie Nelson before it even began, but instead, it became a turning point. From then on, every setback, every closed door became fuel. If Nashville didn't want him, he would keep writing. If no one would listen, he would keep playing. Because deep down, Willie Nelson wasn't just chasing fame, he was chasing survival. Music wasn't a career choice. It was the only thing keeping him alive. And slowly, that resilience, that refusal to give up, would begin to pay off. The boy from Abbott, who had been abandoned, broken, and nearly destroyed in his 20s, was about to take his pain and turn it into songs the whole world would one day sing. The late 1950s and early 1960s should have been Willie Nelson's breakthrough. Instead, they became a lesson in heartbreak all over again. Because while Nashville still rejected Willie as a singer, they couldn't ignore one thing: his songwriting. He began selling his songs for scraps of money just to get by. And those songs, they weren't just good, they were masterpieces. There was Family Bible, a song dripping with faith and nostalgia. Willie sold the rights for a mere $50. $50 for a song that went on to become a gospel standard. Then came Crazy. He offered it to Patsy Cline. At first, she didn't want it. She thought it was too strange, too different. But when she finally recorded it, Crazy became one of the biggest hits in country music history. To this day, it's one of the most played jukebox songs of all time. And then, funny how time slips away. Another classic, another timeless ballad. But once again, it was someone else who made it famous. Time and time again, Willie's words, his melodies, his genius flowed through the radio waves. But not in his own voice. Other artists became stars from his songs, while Willie Nelson himself remained invisible. Nashville executives kept saying the same thing. Your voice is too nasal. Your phrasing is too strange. You don't fit the mold. And maybe that was true. Willie's voice wasn't smooth or polished. It was cracked, weathered, and real. A voice that carried the scars of his life. But Nashville didn't want real. They wanted clean and perfect. So while his songs soared up the charts for others, Willie played dive bars, struggled to pay rent, and fought to keep his family together. He watched the industry get rich off his talent while he stayed poor and overlooked. It was a cruel irony. The world was already singing Willie Nelson's music, but they didn't even know it was his. But deep down, Willie believed something the industry couldn't yet see. He believed his voice, that raw, broken, honest voice, was the very thing that set him apart. And when the time came, when the world was ready to hear it, that voice would change country music forever. By the early 1970s, Willie Nelson was tired of the rejection, tired of Nashville's polished rules, tired of living a life that didn't feel like his own. And then fate delivered one more cruel blow. His ranch in Tennessee, the place where he had tried to build stability for his family, burned to the ground. Everything he owned went up in flames. Most men would have seen that as the end. But for Willie Nelson, it was liberation. He packed what little he had left Nashville behind, and returned home to Texas. And what he found there would change not only his life, but country music itself. In Austin, Texas. The music scene was different. It wasn't about fitting into Nashville's strict boxes. It was raw, wild, free. Long-haired hippies and redneck cowboys shared the same dance floors, drinking the same beer, listening to the same music. Austin wasn't about rules, it was about truth. And in that truth, Willie Nelson found his place. He grew out his hair and beard, traded the sharp Nashville suits for jeans, boots, and a bandana. He stopped trying to be what the industry wanted him to be, and became exactly who he was. Then came the music. In 1973, Willie released Shotgun Willie. The critics loved it. Fans connected instantly. It wasn't clean, it wasn't polished. It was Willie, unfiltered, unapologetic, and honest. But the real explosion came 2 years later, in 1975, with Red-Headed Stranger, a strange, haunting concept album about love, betrayal, and murder. Nashville executives thought it was too raw, too sparse, too uncommercial. They begged him to change it. Willie refused. And when the album hit the shelves, it shocked everyone. Red-Headed Stranger didn't just succeed, It became a masterpiece, selling millions and turning Willie Nelson into a household name. Out of the ashes of his burned ranch, Willie Nelson had reinvented himself. He was no longer just a struggling songwriter. He was the face of something new, something rebellious. Together with Waylon Jennings, Jesse Coulter, and Tompall Glazer, he became the leader of what would be called the outlaw country movement. Music that didn't bow to Nashville, didn't play by the rules, and spoke directly to the soul of the people. Suddenly, the man once dismissed for being too raw was the most authentic voice in the genre. He sold out arenas, topped the charts, and became a cultural icon. The boy from Abbott, Texas, the one who had been abandoned, rejected, and overlooked, was now an outlaw hero, and the world was finally listening to his voice. By the early 1990s, Willie Nelson wasn't just a country star. He was a living American icon. Decades of music, sold-out arenas, hit records, and a place in the hearts of millions. He had survived rejection, heartbreak, tragedy, and even helped lead a musical revolution. But then came a challenge bigger than any stage, bigger than any audience. A battle not with critics or record labels, but with the government itself. In 1990, the Internal Revenue Service came knocking. Their claim? Willie Nelson owed a staggering $16.7 million in unpaid taxes. The number was so large, it seemed impossible. Part of it was mismanagement from his accountants. Part of it was bad investments. And part of it was the IRS charging interest and penalties that ballooned the debt to unthinkable levels. Willie didn't have the money, not even close. The IRS swooped in like a storm. They seized nearly everything. His homes, his ranches, his recording studio, all stripped away. Possessions boxed up, hauled off, and put on the auction block. The image was surreal. Willie Nelson, one of the most beloved figures in American music, suddenly broke, homeless, and humiliated. Newspapers splashed headlines across the country. Critics whispered that his career was finished. But if there was one thing Willie Nelson had mastered in life, it was resilience. Instead of retreating into shame, he did the unthinkable. He turned his disaster into music. He sat down with nothing but a guitar and his voice and began recording an album he called The IRS Tapes, Who'll Buy My Memories. It wasn't a glossy Nashville record. It was raw, stripped down, just Willie and his songs. He released it on tape and CD, with proceeds going directly to pay the IRS. And then something extraordinary happened. His fans, ordinary people, working people, the same kind of folks who had always filled his audiences, rose up in support. They bought the album. They donated money. At IRS auctions, loyal fans purchased Willie's seized items, his instruments, his personal belongings, only to turn around and give them back to him. It was as if the country had decided together Willie Nelson would not fall. Not like this. Slowly, dollar by dollar, tape by tape, the mountain of debt began to shrink. The IRS, realizing they had pushed too hard against someone too loved to be destroyed, finally relented. Over the years, Willie paid off every cent. And when it was over, when the burden was finally lifted, Willie Nelson didn't just survive, he came back stronger. The scandal that could have ended his career instead deepened his legend. Because Willie wasn't just a singer. He was proof that no matter how bad things got, abandoned as a child, rejected as an artist, broke in his 20s, crushed by the government in his 50s, he would not quit. Willie Nelson was an outlaw, yes, but more than that, he was indestructible. And when he walked back on stage, guitar in hand, the cheers weren't just for his music anymore. They were for the man himself, the survivor, the fighter, the living symbol of resilience. The outlaw had beaten Nashville. He had beaten the odds. And now he had beaten the IRS. Through every storm in his life, Willie Nelson had leaned on two things: his music and the people he loved most. Family, bandmates, and friends weren't just companions. They were part of the foundation that kept him standing when the world tried to knock him down. But even legends cannot escape tragedy. And for Willie, the deepest wounds came not from critics or deaths, but from the loss of the ones closest to him. In 1991, his world shattered. His son, Willie Nelson, only 33 years old, was found dead in a moment of darkness and despair. For a man who had endured abandonment as a child, the pain of losing his own child was almost unbearable. Willie carried that grief silently, channeling it into his music, letting the song speak what words never could. But the scar never healed. Then the years kept taking. In 2020, the world changed with a pandemic. And for Willie, it brought another heartbreak. Paul English, his drummer, his enforcer, his friend of more than half a century, passed away at 87. Paul wasn't just the beat behind the music, he was family. A man who had ridden shotgun through Willie's wildest years, protecting him, laughing with him, living the outlaw life together. When Paul was gone, Willie lost more than a bandmate. He lost a brother. 2 years later, in 2022, tragedy struck again. His beloved sister, Bobby Nelson, passed away. Bobby had been there from the very beginning. She wasn't just his sibling. She was his musical partner, his pianist, his anchor. The sound of her keys had been part of his journey for decades. To lose Bobby was to lose a piece of his own soul. And then, in 2024, another blow. Chris Christopherson, fellow highwayman, kindred spirit, outlaw poet, was gone, with Johnny Cash and Waylon Jennings already long past. Willie found himself in a place he never thought he'd be. The last highwayman, the last voice of a band that had once stood shoulder to shoulder, 4 rebels against the world. Each loss carved into him, each one left him more alone. And yet, Willie kept playing. He kept singing, because that's how he survived. Through the pain, through the grief, through the unbearable silence left by those he loved, Willie carried them with him. Every show, every note, every word. They were still there. And for audiences watching him, it was clear. When Willie Nelson stepped on stage, he wasn't just singing his own story anymore. He was singing for all of them. Billy, Paul, Bobby, Waylon, Johnny, Chris. The boy from Abbott, Texas, abandoned as a child, had outlived almost everyone he had loved along the way. But through his music, none of them were truly gone. Willie Nelson remained, the last outlaw, the last highway. For all his resilience, for all the miles he had traveled on the road and the stages he had conquered, Willie Nelson's toughest battles were not always with the world outside, but with the body that carried him. Willie had always been open about his lifestyle. The long nights, the endless touring, the smoke that followed him wherever he went. Cigarettes, cigars, marijuana, they were as much a part of his image as his guitar. But decades of smoking took a toll. He developed emphysema, a disease that slowly robs the lungs of their power. Breathing became harder. Singing became a fight. At one point, his lung collapsed. For a man who lived on the road, who lived for the stage, the idea that his breath, his very voice, might be taken from him was terrifying. But Willie Nelson had never been one to surrender. In 2015, he underwent stem cell treatments to repair the damage to his lungs. And while many men his age might have slowed down, Willie made changes, real ones. He gave up tobacco for good. Even marijuana, his lifelong companion, he eventually gave up smoking. But Willie Nelson wasn't about to leave it behind entirely. Instead, he switched to edibles, finding a way to keep his ritual without destroying his body. At the same time, he doubled down on something most people never associated with an outlaw cowboy: health, yoga, meditation, breathing exercises, organic food, a life rooted in simplicity and balance. Friends and fans who saw him in those years were stunned. While others his age withered away, Willie seemed to hold steady. His braids still long, his voice still strong, his spirit unbroken. And when he walked out on stage, guitar strapped across his chest, the crowd would rise as one. Not just because he was Willie Nelson, but because he was proof that even after a lifetime of pushing his body to the edge, he could adapt, he could survive. The health battles slowed him down, yes, but they didn't stop him. Nothing ever stopped him. Through sheer willpower, discipline, and the wisdom to change, Willie Nelson kept the music alive. He found a way to keep going, not just for himself, but for the generations of fans who still needed his voice. Because Willie Nelson wasn't just singing songs anymore. He was singing survival. In his later years, Willie Nelson found something he had spent a lifetime searching for: peace. The road had nearly broken him more than once. The losses had carved deep scars. But at his ranch near Spicewood, Texas, Willie finally built the kind of life that no amount of money or fame could buy. A life rooted in family, music, and the land itself. The ranch isn't just a home, it's a sanctuary. Horses roam the pastures, friends drop by without warning. And at the center of it all is Willie, often sitting quietly with his guitar, surrounded by the people he loves. Family has always been at the heart of his story, and in these years, it became his greatest comfort. His children, especially Lucas and Amy, grew not just into adults, but into musicians carrying forward the Nelson sound. Lucas, with his band, Promise of the Real, has earned acclaim across rock and country alike. Amy has built her own career as a singer-songwriter. And often they join their father on stage, their voices blending with his, the torch being passed in real time. For audiences, seeing Willie perform with his children is more than a concert. It's witnessing a legacy stretch across generations. The outlaw who once stood alone is now part of a family chorus, proving that music doesn't die. It carries on in the blood, in the voice, in the spirit of those who follow. Financially, too, the storms of the past have calmed. The IRS nightmare that once stripped him bare is now long behind him. Today, his net worth rests steady at around $25 to $30 million. But more importantly, Willie Nelson has something money cannot measure: stability. After decades of turbulence, he is free. And yet, even in peace, Willie never stops. He still tours, still records, still surprises fans who marvel at how a man in his 90s can command the stage with such quiet power. He lives simply, eats clean, practices yoga, and surrounds himself with family and music. The boy from Abbott, Texas, who once had nothing, now has everything that truly matters: land, love, laughter, and the sound of guitars echoing through the Texas night. In the end, Willie Nelson didn't just build a career. He built a legacy, one his children are carrying into the future, one that will live on long after the lights dim and the curtain falls. Because Willie Nelson isn't just a musician. He's a father, a friend, a survivor, and a reminder that even the hardest journeys can end in peace. At 92 years old, most men are remembered in photographs, in old stories, in dusty records that no longer spin. But Willie Nelson is not most men. In 2025, he released his 76th studio album, The Last Leaf on the Tree. The title alone carried a weight that shook listeners, an image of survival, of being the final one standing when the others have all fallen. And on that record, Willie was not alone. He recorded with his son, Micah. Blending generations into one sound, father and son weaving music that critics called one of the most profound works of his career. For Willie, it wasn't about chasing charts or proving anything to anyone. It was about truth, about passing on the flame while it still burned bright. And when audiences heard the album, they knew this wasn't just another country record. It was a statement, a reflection, a living legend whispering, "I'm still here." But Willie didn't stop with the studio. Even in his 90s, he stepped out onto stages where the lights blazed hot and the crowds roared like thunder. And in one unforgettable moment, he stood side by side with Beyoncé, a meeting of generations, of genres, of voices that carried America itself in their songs. The Outlaw and the Queen, sharing a stage, proving that music has no boundaries, no age, no walls. What makes Willie Nelson so extraordinary isn't just that he's still creating at 92, it's how he's doing it, with authenticity, with humility, with a peace that only comes from a man who has made peace with himself. He no longer runs from age, he embraces it. Each wrinkle, each scar, each gray hair is part of the story. A story told not in chapters, but in songs. Songs that stretch across nearly a century of American life. From the little boy in Abbott, Texas, abandoned but not broken, to the outlaw who burned down Nashville's rules, to the survivor who stood up after the IRS tried to bury him, Willie Nelson has never stopped moving forward. And now, in his 10th decade of life, he is still writing, still singing, still reminding the world what endurance truly looks like. Because Willie Nelson is more than a country singer. He is a witness to history. He is a living poem. He is the sound of resilience, of love, of rebellion, and of peace. And when the last leaf finally falls from the tree, his music will remain, carried on by his children, his fans, and generations not yet born. At 92, Willie Nelson is not looking back. He is still creating, still giving, still alive in every sense of the word. And that is immortality. And so the story of Willie Nelson is not just the story of a man, it is the story of resilience itself. From a little boy abandoned in Abbott, Texas, to a 92-year-old legend still writing songs that move the world, Willie Nelson has shown us what it means to endure, to adapt, and to never stop creating. He is the last outlaw, the last highwayman, the last leaf on the tree. But his music will live forever, carried by his family, his fans, and every soul that finds hope in his words. Willie Nelson is proof that no matter the pain, no matter the obstacles, life can still be turned into something beautiful. If this story moved you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you never miss more stories of legendary lives. And tell us in the comments, what's your favorite Willie Nelson song and why? Because as long as we keep his songs alive, Willie Nelson will never die.